Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Schwartz from Benchling. We're a cloud software company that provides laboratory informatics solutions for life sciences R&D. Thanks for joining in, and thanks to the conference organizers for having us. There's a panel session coming up next that will talk about machine learning, citizen science, and other emerging tools for predictive intelligence. And so I wanted to lead into that by sharing some perspective on what we see life science companies doing to start preparing their digital infrastructures to leverage these new approaches. We've supported close to 400 life science companies in their digital informatics transformations. And the themes that we see come up most often are the increasing complexity of the science and the need to constantly adapt. So let's just start by recapping how our industry has shifted. If you look back to the early part of this millennium, the best-selling drug had tens of millions of users and targeted just a single indication. The first oncology drug with the companion diagnostic had just barely hit the market. Today, many of the top drugs have anywhere from 5 to 10 different indications, essentially using the same mechanism of action to treat disparate disease. There are over 1,000 oncology drugs in development, and 73% of them have an associated biomarker. 8 of the top 10 drugs are biologics, and we've now seen the first 2 CAR T-cell therapies introduced to the market. And what's in the pipeline is even more promising. There are new modalities like antibody drug conjugates and bispecifics, newer types of cell and gene therapies that all have the potential to increase efficacy and move towards a more curative intent. So medicine is getting more precise and powerful, but it's also getting more complex. These new modalities across biologics and adaptive cell engineering have far more complex structures and processes used to develop and manufacture them. So we've seen the industry shift to a new model to support the next generation of therapeutic development. We've seen our customers align their efforts into discovery platforms. So it's not just focused on a single product, but instead they focus on a distinct pathway or technology that's capable of producing multiple therapies across multiple indications. And as the science becomes more complex, we're seeing teams become much more specialized to increase the depth and efficiency that they can bring to each step in the R&D process. And each of these teams is producing not just more data, but more complex data. There are more contextualizations that need to be maintained as you move downstream in the process and across programs. And there are more streams of data, from lab automation and manufacturing sensors to newer sources like you'll hear about shortly coming from real-world data. So the industry is looking towards digital solutions here to not just manage large volumes of data, but to bring order and structure to it. Before we can rely heavily on data automation technologies, we have to make sure that our digital infrastructure is ready to handle this. These are the areas that we tend to focus on with our customers, and it also guides our own product design philosophy. The most important thing is getting the balance right between using tailored solutions for the science that your companies are pursuing, but maintaining the capability to evolve and iterate. And I'll share an example of this in a moment. When this is done right, your digital solutions can perpetually provide a platform for scientific decision support. And this is ultimately what we think is the biggest lever on hitting milestones faster. And something that might be easy to overlook here is the end user experience. Data scientists and app developers will always have their tools of choice, but scientists need a user experience and an interface that reflects their operational workflows and saves them time, or they simply won't adopt them, and then the data won't be there when you need it. So what does it mean to be built for complex science? There has to be alignment between experimental workflow and the way that the underlying biological and chemical entities are modeled. As an example, we support a lot of customers who are working on the next generation of adaptive cellular therapies. And there's several different approaches here, from CAR T and T-cell receptors to natural killer cells and tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes. And the science here generally involves the iteration of many different variable regions of a CAR construct, combined with in vitro and in vivo evaluation and optimization. And while this here is a very simplified view of the process, it's actually very complex to model this from a data perspective. Every fragment of the constructs used has their own sequence and properties and ontology, and every resulting CAR-T has experimental results, both in vitro and in vivo, that need to be tied back to the drug candidate and its underlying parts and sequences. And so this is clearly a data modeling challenge, but it's also an operational challenge, since these also represent the day-to-day functions for lab scientists who are developing these therapies. When we think of preparing digital infrastructure for these kinds of challenges, we have to think about both the data management and structure, as well as the operational considerations. The way that we think about this is to build applications that follow the operational workflows, from in silico design to experimental execution, but also to make sure that the data capture flows into a structured data model. And this means that at any point in the process, you should be able to trace your work back to all of the preceding steps and underlying sequences. And more importantly, for scientific decision support, the data can be readily queried across any dimension of the data model. This is a necessity to start building in automation and machine learning routines. And so that's just one example of how a very complex scientific process can be structured into a digital solution. But the hallmark of any good program is that the science will evolve over time. And so what happens when things change? Digital solutions have to be adaptable. The IT world has largely moved away from monolithic software and towards more agile approaches. But adaptable shouldn't always have to mean coding and application development. Many life science companies either don't have the resources to do this, or they want to use the precious resources they do have to focus on higher value operations. And this is just an illustrative example of a protein purification process, and it reflects the constant iteration and evolution that these specialized teams see on a daily basis. So in an ideal world, the data model, the process, and the workflows should be configurable in a low or no code environment. So companies can iterate and evolve quickly without being overly resource intensive or dependent on their digital partners. One way that we seek to achieve this is with a configurable data model that's editable right from an administrator panel. So users can adjust the relationships and the metadata of any particular entity quickly and without code. And this also applies to process workflows, where you can update iterative processes like the example you see here. Adaptability can apply to data modeling and process levels, but it can also apply at the institutional level. And we've seen this recently with the global pandemic. One of our customers, Corteva, is a large global agricultural biotechnology company. And while their primary business focus is on seeds and crop protection, they saw that their customers and communities were being severely impacted by COVID. So they quickly pivoted focus to be able to offer COVID testing services using their genetic screening capabilities. And they could adapt their digital solutions in a relatively short time frame to accommodate this. And they're now testing hundreds of thousands of samples in their local communities. So hopefully that provides some perspective on how to think about aligning your digital infrastructure to begin taking advantage of this emerging wave of new data streams and automation technologies. If you'd like to learn more about the range of enterprise lab informatics solutions that Benchling provides, please feel free to reach out. We'd encourage you to visit our virtual booth to speak with a product specialist, and you can certainly contact me directly anytime. I hope you enjoy the panel session coming up, and thanks for your time.